What's up, Zach here, and today I've got the all-new New Balance Rebel V4, and from the outside, these things look just like absolute warriors of a shoe. There are some caveats to them, and I think some things that are gonna opt people in or out of them. And thanks to New Balance for sending me a pair to check out. However, this video is by no means sponsored, and all opinions, good, bad, and indifferent, are all my own. Now, starting off in the uppers, they kind of look like a tiny hat on a very large man, but I do think they work really well, especially you just look at it on the microscope. You can just really see how intricate the weaving is with the TPU weaving, but it's also a pretty strong upper. The one thing I will note is that number one, the laces are pretty small. They're a little bit narrow and just thin, but the lace eyelets are also matching up with that profile. So if you're gonna switch laces, you better switch them also to another thin pair of laces. You never get them through. Now the tongue is pretty much non-existent. It does breathe very well, but I do like the gusseting on this. You do get an elastic gusset on these, and it is, a little bit more meshed and breathable. It kind of just fits with the entire profile of the uppers in terms of breathability. If you just look at it on the breathability test of the heat gun, only heated up 91.6 degrees, and then, the heat mapping of these things really does match up with that, with really heat blowing out of everywhere on this. So the uppers, at least from the midfoot on, are really meant to expel heat and moisture and expel it pretty easily. Now, of course, you do sacrifice some durability with that, because you look at the upper durability test, 10 seconds highest grit sandpaper. The burr just starts working right through this. However, like I said, these are road running shoes. I don't see anybody taking these through brush anytime soon. So it's a blunt containment. Yeah, the ankle collar is pretty low. You're gonna get some heel slippage in these if you're not using a runner's knot, which it is provided in these, obviously. But even with that, you do need some break-in on these to seat a little bit more into the heel counter. They do for sure break in, and we'll talk about that break-in when we get to the midsole section. But suffice to say, when you first put them on, you're gonna be popping out a little bit, but that will get better and better as the weeks progress. I actually saw something on Instagram before I get into the meat and bones of the teardown. They were doing this with the shoe and it was bouncing back. This table isn't really stable here. I can do it over here. And it was bouncing really high, and that's all well and good when there's no weight in the shoe. However, there's no shank in this, right? It's just a giant slab of Peba foam, and a very soft Peba foam at that. The shape and geometry of the midsole, I guess you can call it a rocker. It's more of just a giant scoop, right? Honestly, this would create a circle if it went all the way around. The radius of this is so crazy in the forefoot. Look at the bounce height test on these things, kind of tells the same story. It only got 30 centimeters in the heel, then 39 in the forefoot, which is what you'd expect more from a Peba-based foam. The reason for that is because there's nothing solid in the rear foot for it to bounce off of, right? There's a huge slab of foam in there, nothing solid, right? Whereas in the forefoot, because the stack's a little bit less, it can actually interact with the ground a little bit more and give a little bit of a better pop. That really translates to how they feel on foot, at least for me, which we'll get to in the runnability section. But suffice to say, it is a very soft and comfortable feeling foam. I dare you to find something more comfortable than this underfoot. But in terms of raw performance, there are other Peba-based shoes out there that give a much more lively feel when the shoe is actually on foot. Yeah, when you're just messing around with them here, they go crazy. It's just when you actually put a lot of body weight on them, especially in different strike positions, that's when these things really start to, take it, but really don't dish it back out. And looking at the outsole tread, I probably should say, looking at the midsole again, because there is so much exposed midsole foam down here, it's more of just a cutout aggro crag pattern that starts from the midfoot, goes into the forefoot. You do have some landing pads here in the rear foot for rear foot strikers, but surprisingly, the durometer on this was a little bit higher than I thought it would be, and its resistance to abrasion was better than I thought it would be. On the outsole durability test on these things, 10 seconds highest grit sandpaper. Yeah, almost a millimeter of damage on these, which is pretty crazy because the rubber is so thin. It also spreads out over a very wide surface area. So if you're somebody with more of a midfoot striking gait, more of a flat strike, I don't really see you getting the friction high enough to really knock these down too much, especially because they are jutted out patterns, right? They're not popping out of the shoe. I do think this lasts a little bit longer than you think it would, and I actually had these for a while, and the wear that I got on these was not nearly what I thought. So in terms of the rubber engineering of this, in terms of it being a very, very light rubber setup, and you can see from the midsole how light these shoes are. I do think they did a pretty good job. I would have liked to see maybe just one more strip here for, you know, maybe that true heel striking gait where you go lateral and then, you know, kind of S curves into the medial. So that's really the only complaint I would have about that. Now, if you look at this on the speed ratio, it does come in at a 4.08. Now, shank score of 0 because it doesn't have a shank. But that's right up there with the Asics Super Blast, which is a pretty similar setup shoe, which I thought was really interesting. They kind of got really the same speed ratio. And yeah, these things are incredibly light. The stack is incredibly high of PEBA foam. I would say for somebody with very lean and strong legs, somebody that kind of has a fast strike, right? Like you don't spend much time on the ground, I think that these are a really nice asset for you. When we get into the striking section, like what strikers these are best for, I think that'll kind of tell more of the story. But I would say these shoes, they're not going to be giving a lot back to you unless you're a very light runner, right? Then I think it can compress and push back on you. Then I think you'll start to feel more pop. I think the heavier of a runner you are, the less snapback these things are going to have. I will say though, they are light enough and easy enough to get from step to step that yeah, like I said, if you've got the right stride for these and if you've got the right running cadence, then I think then these will be pretty darn quick. Now on the grip test ramp, once again, slipped at 44 degrees, which is pretty much the same as every shoe in its class. I still find it fascinating that basketball and tennis shoes have such a wide variation in grip, whereas running shoes, you know, in each category, they're all pretty much the same. So like I said, grip on really slick or dry pavement, asphalt, cement, they're gonna be just fine. And getting into the fit of the Rebel V4, I mean, if you look at it from the bottom, it would just look like, you know, you'd have to be an 8E to fit these. This obviously is, you know, foam jutting out from the bottom. I mean, they are pretty generous fitting, but a pretty, you know, just pretty generous medium to wide fitting shoe. I think a narrow foot, probably go down a half size on these just to get that 1-to-1 real performance fit. You also get a little bit of a weight reduction, which would be a nice little performance boost for you, but also a 2E and 4E. If you can find these just in a 2E or 4E width, then just go true to size 2. That's the best part about New Balance shoes when they come in widths, just get it at your true size. In terms of the snake bitten foot, while they are new, they are very, very forgiving, especially because the base in the heel is so nice and wide, and not just wide, but stable, right? So you don't get a lot of rocking or micro motion if you're a heel striker, and if you're a midfoot striker, they get super wide here right at the midfoot strike point, so you don't get a lot of torsion there either. So while the foam is still performing optimally and the shoe hasn't really broken down yet, yeah, I mean, these are ridiculously forgiving, and just like I said, the geometry of the shoe really helps out for any sort of torsional issues or any sort of, you know, stress strain issues. It's once the foam starts breaking down, it is the issue. I think if you can get a really low profile orthotic in here, and it better be very low profile, then I think that really takes these up into more of the good for territory. And I really think that extends the life of these. That may be something you would need a custom orthotic for. I do have a custom orthotic guide and checklist in the description if you want to check that out. That's all my builds for custom orthotics, but that might be more of a custom build on these just because the heel counter is so low. Some over-the-counter orthotics are going to be okay. More of the flat-heeled orthotics like the Power Step Pulse, the Move Game Days, those are going to be the best for these in terms of a low-profile orthotic, but you might even need something lower profile than that to not slip out of these while they're new. And bringing it back to weight, if you're a lighter runner, like I said, these get better and better and better. The heavier you get, the more reinforcement you're going to need on them. But talking about the all-important runability, or, you know, just the performance of the Rebel V4, you know, these things were really an incredible shoe for a more true to little bit proximal midfoot striker. That's why I was kind of complaining about the rubber in the back too, is because even for a heel striker, man, they're a really forgiving shoe. I mean, they're really forgiving shoe, especially with the geometry and the radius of the midsole. They just transition that type of strike so easily. They run through a full gait cycle so easily. I mean, for a forefoot striker, if you put it on the table here, it looks like it's just laid out perfectly for a forefoot striker. The only problem is because there's no shank, when you land on that forefoot strike, it does give that little heel snap more than some other shoes do. Remember, even forefoot strikers, if you do a slow motion camera, a lot of times their heel will come down afterwards, right? They'll do a little heel tap. In these, it's a little bit more pronounced. You notice it a lot more. But when you're striking midfoot or rear foot, the way the shoe goes through that cycle is just so fluid. It's like a work of art, to be honest. I was just watching on the camera, like it looks so nice how the shoe compresses and flows through that cycle. So while it's, I think, good for a lightweight, really efficient and very, I'd say, advanced forefoot striker, and who really has their gait just stuck in, right? Like, you have a very efficient and very consistent stride, then yeah, I think these are really good for that mid to forefoot striker. Everybody else, right? Like someone like me, the mid and the rear foot strikers, I think, are better for these. And if someone who's maybe like trying to get into forefoot striking or trying to move up, right, move up the ladder, right, into more of a forefoot strike, these might not be the best shoe to start out with that in, right? I think, like I said, the more advanced of a runner you are, the further up in the shoe it's better for. So I think it also translates to a lot of people having a lot of different opinions on these, because if you're a lighter runner, right, you're not like this bulky, husky dude like I am, and you're probably gonna watch this video kind of roll in your eyes and like, what is he talking about? Versus somebody else, more my profile, is gonna be, just, preaching it from the rooftops. So almost have to kind of match them, right? Like, are you a lightweight runner and a rear foot striker? Are you a heavier runner and a forefoot? Are you more advanced than a forefoot? It really kind of comes down, you're gonna have to kind of match the categories on these. But for the right runner, I think that you're probably gonna be buying 1,000 pairs of these, just like I said, because of the forgiveness and just how comfortable the striking is on these things. I even noticed on my treadmill, which is like really not the most forgiving thing in the world, these felt better than anything I had on that day on that treadmill. I felt better in these than anything, especially because the weight is just being distributed through such a wide area on these. It's just that over the course of a long training block, is that feeling going to stay with you right from day one over to your last day? So I think that's where you kind of have to make the decision. Do you want these or something maybe with a little bit more of a supportive shank underneath of it? So I'd love to hear your thoughts on these, especially if you've picked up a pair of these, if you have a pair, and kind of what your thoughts are. I'd love to know in the comments down below. And if you want to see another shankless shoe that really does feel like it has a really broad and supportive shank, it's Wild. Just two shoes that don't have shanks but feel completely different than Nike Vomero 17 going to the knife. Make sure you click into this video up above and subscribe down below. Respect your rubber and foam. I'll see you somewhere in the Sneakerverse.